Welcome to a new section where we are going to cover the basics of C#. And I know you are eager and you're very excited to start coding our games because they are awesome. They are just awesome. But we need to go through the basics of C#, and if you go through this whole section, you will understand everything later on in the course, because I'm gonna cover C# deeply like in no other course that I saw so far, and even on the internet, because I see people don't cover inheritance, don't cover what are objects, why do we have some functions in Unity when we open a script, so on and so forth. So I want to cover all that, and then it will be clear to you what we are doing when we start creating our game. So I highly advise you that you go through this section and try to understand everything what is going on. If you don't understand, then you can simply ask a question and I will be there to respond ASAP, or as soon as possible. So I was thinking about, should I create a new project or not? But I'm gonna go into my first game, or our first game, pumpkins and golems, that we have created in the first section. So instead of creating a new project using this one, I will be able to explain to you some things that we did here while we are explaining basics of C#, and then you will understand what is going on. So I'm gonna go into the scripts folder and I am gonna create a new folder inside of it, and I'm gonna say intro to C#. So intro to C#, and inside of that folder, I'm gonna create a new C# script by right-clicking, of course, and then go create, and then C# script, and I'm gonna call this one tester, just so that we can, well, test things out. Now, first things first, if I run this script, so I'm gonna run it, it's gonna open here in MonoDevelop. By the way, if you coded in Visual Studio, or you prefer to code in Visual Studio, you can simply go here in Unity, and then you can go in Preferences. This is for Mac. On Windows, I believe it's under Edit, and then Preferences is somewhere around here or here. But either way, you go to Preferences, then you go to External Tools, and then here for the External Script Editor, you can either choose Internal, or you can browse and choose, well, your Visual Studio. So going back here, this is our tester script. As always, I like to do things like this. I like to tag it here with a comment, and we will cover comments in a moment, and give a little bit space. I'm doing just so that we can see what is going on. Maybe let me just try zooming in. No, I think zooming out like this is okay. So the first thing that I want to cover, and that's the basic thing, or the first thing that's always covered when you start learning a programming languages, and that is a programming language, and that is variables. So what are variables? Well, we've seen them before. We use them in our pumpkin, we use them in our camera follow script. The first variable that I want to introduce is called a float. And we declare variables like this. We first type the type of that variable, then we give it a name, then we give it a value. So the type of the variable is called float, and now we give it a name. Let's say, for example, power. And now we give it a value by typing equals, and now we type the value of that variable. Let's say 2.1 like this. Now, since this is a float, which begins with letter F, we need to add F here at the end to tell the compiler that this is a float. And we will see in a second why. But this is a decimal point variable. A float denotes a decimal point variable. We can either type 2.1. If it's a whole number, for example, like 2, then we can only type 2. I mean, that's like a shortcut. But you can type 2.0 and, well, it will be the same. But like a shortcut, instead of 2.0, you can type 2. And since this is a decimal number, C# or the compiler will automatically count it as a 2.0. But if you want to type, let's say 2.5 or 2.4, then you need to do 0.4, because otherwise C# will not know that. So we need to tell it. So that's it. This is all that it takes to declare a variable. And as I said, first you type the type, and this is a float, then you give it a name. Names for your variables depend on you and solely on you. But when you are creating projects, you want to give meaningful names. Like here, we give it power. And if you go in the pumpkin script, we gave it move force. Why? Well, because we are using it here to move our pumpkin. So we give it a meaningful name. That's why, or that is the reason when we take a look at our code, we know what that variable is doing. And maybe you're confused. I'm saying when we take a look at our code, we know what the variable is doing. When you're working on the project now, you will know, of course, what the variable is doing. But when you leave that project and don't touch it for 6 months, 1 year, and you come back to it, believe me, you will forget your code. So you want to give meaningful names, and then you will know automatically, okay, when you go back to this project after 1 year and you see move force, okay, well, we use this variable in order to move our body. And we see here, yeah, we use it to move our body. This is what I mean by that. So moving forward, another decimal point variable is called a double. So we declare it like double, and then we give it a name, let's say health, and then we give it a value, and let's say it's 3.5. And we don't need to add F at the end. Maybe you're saying, do we have to add D at the end? We can, but we don't need to do so. Which brings me back to this F right here. If I remove this F and save the script, notice if I go in the Unity editor, what is going to happen here in the console? It says, literal of type double cannot be implicitly converted to type float. Add suffix F to create a literal of this type. Let me just double type this, and it's pointing to our float variable. What does this mean? It means that if we only declare a float like this, we don't type F at the end. So 2.4, C# is now confused because double is also a decimal point number, and we can type here 2.4, and that's a double. But a float is also, as I said, a decimal point number. So how we can differentiate between them, how C# can differentiate between them, is that we add F at the end of a float. So we need to add F at the end of the float, and now when I save it, go back in the Unity editor, the error will go away. Don't worry about these warnings. It's only telling us that we have declared these variables here, but we are not using them anywhere else in our script. But the point is that when we add F at the end of the float, that's how we differentiate between a float and a double, because a double is also a decimal point variable. Now, in my previous courses, my previous tutorials on YouTube, people ask me, okay, this is a decimal point number and this is a decimal point number. They were talking and referring to a float and a double. So what is the difference between them? The difference between them is that a float is a 32-bit number and a double is a 64-bit number. And also, a double is more precise than a float. The other day, I got a comment from a student like, he was talking about variables, it was not clear, I only have understood that a double is more precise than a float. I mean, what is else here to understand? A double is more precise than a float, and a double is a 64-bit number, and a float is a 32-bit number. So a double is precise, let's say up to this number right here. I started typing characters. Up to this number here, and a float is precise, let's say up to this number here. Now this is my rough guess, and I always say this. If you want to know in more detail about the precision of a double, then you should Google that up, and the same way for a float. But this is just to give you a picture what is going on here. So a double is a little bit more precise than a float. And also a double is a 64-bit number and a float is a 32-bit number. Same way as that student understood, but he was complaining about that. There is nothing else to it. Moving forward, these are decimal point numbers. Do we have whole numbers? Yes, we do, and they're called integers. And we declare them like this. We type int, short for integer, and then we give it a value. Let's say score, and it's equal to 44. And of course, on every statement or every declaration that we do, we need to add these semicolons at the end in order to end our statement. If we don't add them like this, then bam, we have a problem. And it's not quite clear. It says unexpected symbol void. If we go here, it's pointing here on the start. But usually when that happens, unexpected symbol that you see here, so when you see unexpected symbol in your console as an error, that usually means that the previous line has no semicolon here to end the statement. In most cases, but sometimes it does not mean, but in most cases it means. So an integer is a whole number. So we type int score is equal to 44. Now we cannot type 44.5. This is not allowed. If we go back here, it is going to complain, cannot convert double to an integer. Are you missing a cast? In short, Unity editor is telling us you have declared here an integer, but you put here a double. Something wrong with you? No, Unity. Everything is okay. I'm good, bro. So yeah, this is a whole number, and that's what it is to it. That's all there is. This is very simple. Don't be scared, because I see most people are scared like, do I need math? I don't know. No, don't worry. This is really simple. So int, short for integer, then you give it a name, equals to assign a value, and then you type here a value. Moving forward, we have something called a string, and we type string, string, then we give it a name, which I'm gonna say name, very original, I know, and a string is a character-based or a character variable. What does that mean? Well, we type here characters, but we don't type them like this. If we type it like this is not gonna work. We see a warning here right away. We need to type them between these quotes. So we need to type double quotes in between them. So between the quotes, like this, I'm hoping that I have spelled this correct. Don't judge me. So between the quotes, we type what we want. So for example, we can use the string in order to represent the name of our player. So we can say wizard like this. So string name wizard. String is a variable type, same as a float, double, or integer. Name is the name that we give. So you can give any name that you want. So you can say player name like this. Equal to, then you assign a value. And then you can type anything that you want, but a string needs to be typed between double quote marks. And then you type characters that you want that are meaningful for your game. And the last type of variable that we have is called a boolean. And in short, we type it or declare it bool, which is short for boolean like this. In some programming languages, you need to type boolean. For example, in Java, you will need to type boolean, but it's the same thing. But here you type bool, and this bool variable can only have two values. So I'm going to say here is alive, is equal to, and it can either be true like this, or it can be false. So a boolean variable can either be true or either it can be false. And that is it to it. There is nothing else to this variable. Again, we are declaring these variables using the same approach. So first you type the type of that variable, then you give it a name. And after that, you simply type equal to, and then you assign a value to that variable. And that's all there is to it. Again, Boolean variables can be true or false, and we will use them in conditional statements, which we will cover later on. But conditionals are this. So this right here, let me just see. Yeah, this is a conditional. If transform.position.y is less than -10, this statement right here is going to return a Boolean. That means this will here either be true or false. So either is our position y less than -10 or it is greater than -10. There is no third outcome. And we will see that when we cover conditionals. And the last thing that I want to talk about is this right here that you see. This, what it says, use this for initialization. I don't want to talk about initialization, but this right here that you see, and let me just move it back. This right here that you see is called a comment. Comments are used to document code. And we do that by typing \, so 2 backslashes, and then you type what you want. Type whatever you want. Want like this. Not want, man. You can also type it like this. You can say \, and then asterisk sign, and then you can go back and type asterisk sign, and then \, again. So anything that you type between here, so what you type between the backslashes, so between this and between this, whatever you type here is a comment. Whatever you type between is a comment. Again, comments are used to document your code. Now, don't be confused and go crazy using these comments all around your project. No. So what you're going to do is, or what I do, good code documents itself. So when you type here float power, you don't need to go here and say like this, this is the power of the player. You don't need to do that, payer. Not payer, man, it's player. We don't want to be payers, we want to be getters, get the money, not pay the money. So yeah, this is the power of the player. We don't need to do that. Why? Well, because if we take a look at the name of the variable, float power, well, this must be the power of the player and denoting how much power he has when he hits an enemy. We don't need to type a comment like this. But what I usually do is, for example, you can use these comments like here. Use this for initialization, and then you know what this function is doing. For example, if you have another function, and we will cover functions in another lesson, don't worry about that. So you can type above the function like this. Update is called once per frame. For example, we have a function to calculate two numbers. We can say this function is used to calculate two numbers, just so that we know what this function can do. And I also like to denote, for example, that something like this. So start function begins here, and I type then start function ends here, just so that I know where my start function is. And the reason for it is if I have a lot of code here and I type that code, let's say I type the function here and here and here, and the function goes up to here, and I don't see where is the beginning and the end. This is what I like to do. So yeah, you can use it like that, but just don't go and type all of these comments everywhere in your code. Good code documents itself and point or dot, however you want to call it. Anyways, this is it for this video. These are variables, nothing extraordinary, nothing hard. It's very easy, and this is what you are going to use. These 5 types of variables that we have introduced, this is what you're going to use to complete, to put together, to create, to code your game. And this is all there is to it. Again, just briefly before we end the video, I'm going to go through every single variable. So a float is a decimal point variable. We type the decimal point number, and we need to add f at the end. Even though if we type here 2 only, we need to add f at the end, or otherwise we will see the problem that we get. A double is also a decimal point variable. We need to declare it like this. So double, then we give it a name, same as for any variable, and then we give it a value. We don't need to type anything at the end or as a suffix. We can put d here, and if I go here in Unity, it's not going to complain. Notice here we don't have any problems with it, but we don't need to do that, because if we don't type, we only type decimal point, Unity or C# is going to know automatically that this is a double. The difference between the two, again, is a double is a little bit more precise than a float, and it's a 64-bit number, and a float is a 32-bit number, and it is a little less precise. Integer, or short int, is a whole number, and this is how we type it. So int, give it a name, give it a value. We cannot type decimal point numbers here because we will get an error. String is a character-based variable, so we type string, then we give it a name, and then we give it a value between double quotes. So quote, quote, or double quote, and then we give it a value between these quotes. And lastly, a Boolean is a variable, short bool, so we declare it bool, and it's a variable that can either be true or it can be false. So that is all there is to it, guys. Fahir here from AwesomeTuts.com, and I will catch you in the next video.